1 week left in the General Assembly, 84 days of the Missouri primary. We're all here to talk about all the politics on this week of Missouri Politics, starting with our opinion maker panel this week. And we're joined for the first time. Very glad to have Representative Bob Burns of St. Louis County. Representative, welcome.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much.
And the man who, president of Eagle Forum, sometimes my favorite Twitter account, Jeff Mazur. Thanks for being back on the show.
Always great to be here. Thank you.
And friend of the show, Joe Lakin. Thanks for coming back. Now that John Lamping's out of politics, the best hair in Missouri politics. Good to have you back here.
Thanks, Scott.
And coming back to the show, Senator Jason Crowell. But you have a new title, Donald Trump Delegate Jason Crowell. So tell me why you're a Trump delegate. And were you happy this week when he clinched it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always good when a party can start coalescing behind that candidate. The Republican Party is in that process. The Democratic Party hasn't even begun that process yet. So yes, and I went to the 8th Congressional District. First time I've ever been to a county convention. First time I've ever been
knows these people
to
do
the
this stuff?
yeah. First time I've been to all of that. I read the rules. As I was saying off air beforehand, the Senate rule book is easier to read than our delegate selection process. But I figured all that out. Worked with some tremendous people, and with 29 of the 30 counties in the 8th Congressional District overwhelmingly voting for Donald Trump, I think the people deserve what the people have voted for.
Joe Lakin, I was very disappointed when Donald Trump wrapped it up early because I wanted to see the whole national convention get a taste of what the Missouri Senate got with Jason Crowell there, just raising all sorts of cane. So Trump wraps it up. What does that? How's that affect Missouri?
Well, having been on the receiving end of Jason's efforts over the years, I was glad to see that he did wrap it up, and we don't have to see that in July. No, I mean, I think, look, this is going to be an interesting election, obviously. It's historic. I think there's one thing for sure. We're going to start the general election with probably the two most unpopular candidates in presidential history. And I think certainly the debates are going to be something to watch this fall. You know, I think Hillary Clinton and the Democrats have a lot of confidence. With Trump having won the nomination, but I wouldn't count their eggs before they hatch. I think it's going to be an interesting fall.
Jeff Mazur, I would assume Democrats are very happy nationwide, but in Missouri, I'm sorry. I think Sarah Palin got a lot of votes in 2008. I think Mitt Romney got some votes, but maybe not for him. I think Donald Trump does well in Missouri.
I think we can look two places that we saw this week. We saw Roy Blunt, who kind of grudgingly said he's going to support Trump, but I'm not going to go to the convention. I'm not going to go to Cleveland. I'm not going to be a part of that. And we see Ann Wagner, who's basically saying, no, I'm not going to do this. You have to earn my support. You haven't done it. I think those people are two very savvy, sophisticated people. They've been successful here in politics in the state, and they're both saying, hey, Donald Trump, this looks like something I want to be arm's length from. And you've got a lot of other people who are kind of saying, I'm reminded of the guy who loses a bet and has to eat a big heaping pile of dog food, and he's smiling and saying, yeah, this is really pretty good. Meanwhile, he's choking back Alpo in his throat, and he knows it's really bad.
So what you're saying is all the Washington Democrats are behind Hillary Clinton, and all the Washington Republicans are behind Hillary Clinton. Is that really where you want to be in 2016? I mean,
I think we'll see.
Clearly, if you liked invading Iraq, thought that was a great idea. If you liked what's happening to the economy, if you think that the Vicente Fox Industrial Park in Poplar Bluffs happened, wait a minute, no. All the Poplar Bluff jobs are in Guadalajara. You've got a candidate.
We see the polling now that shows Hillary Clinton an overwhelming favorite against Donald Trump. We disregarded the polling when we saw Trump in the lead back last year when we were on the show. Everybody ignored it, said Trump isn't going to last, it's not real. I think we ought not make the same mistake twice. The polling is what it is, and I think Hillary Clinton in a really strong position to defeat Trump, notwithstanding all that.
Representative Burns, I had one person break it down to me. On the south side of the Merrimack in Jefferson County, Donald Trump probably helps more than a normal Republican nominee. On the north side of the Merrimack in South St. Louis County, that might be a spot where Donald Trump drags the ticket down.
I think you're right. I think Donald Trump brings a new dynamic to the presidential race. I look back in history at the Kennedy-Nixon debate, and it was because Nixon didn't shave, they said he lost and all those things. But Donald Trump brings some Hollywood into it. He brings, I like the guy. But I seriously think in my area, South St. Louis, he will drag it down. And it happened on David Letterman's show. David Letterman was really building up Donald Trump about he does great products, and boy, Donald's ego was just getting bigger and bigger. Then he turned the tie over and said, well, this tie's made in China. And Donald Trump started stuttering. And that's the big issue in our state. People want jobs, and our jobs are in China. And I think the issue is who is going to bring jobs back to the United States of America and put America back to work, which will solve many of our problems, our budget problems in this state, this paycheck deception thing will be solved if people have jobs.
Bob Burns, you know, people know you have the hands of a person that's worked for a living.
Yes, sir.
You look at organized labor. Can you honestly say Hillary Clinton will actually address these trade deals really and believe that? But I don't know if Donald Trump can get it done or anybody can, but I think he will at least. He's talking about things that no one would ever talk about before.
I love the fact that he's brought it out. That's why I say I don't hate the guy. I think he's brought some dynamics to this that we haven't had in politics before. We were just talking about this before we went on air. Too many times a politician is afraid to tell what they truly feel. You don't have to worry about that with Donald Trump, and I think that's going to force Hillary Clinton to come to the realization that the American people want America to be strong again. And that comes through jobs, it comes through education, it comes from us getting along as Americans.
Jason Crowell, you're here. Let's take advantage of this. You've seen behind the curtain on this process. There's like a county thing, and there's a congressional thing. Why in the world doesn't, like in America, we're going to have a gubernatorial primary. Whoever gets the most votes wins. You don't split the decisions with different people. How crazy is this process and bewildering to people? And how do you make it just where the person that wins wins? These are Republicans. They should like winning.
Yeah, I think you're going to see that. And if nothing else, the phenomena of feeling the burn on the Democratic side and the phenomenon of Trump on the Republican side is going to drive political decision making back down where it should be with the voters. And I think that's really the biggest trend, if I could say anything about watching Bernie Sanders, a devout socialist, a Democratic socialist who's never identified as a Democrat, that is drawing bigger crowds and enthusiasm within the Democratic Party. If you just look at raw votes, had Bernie Sanders not been involved in the Democratic primary process, the vote turnout is so dramatically depressed on the Democratic side from where Barack Obama had it in 2008.
I remember back in the day when you ran for Senate, there were some self-appointed political elites that thought they would pick the senator. You knew the voters would pick it, and when they actually came for a fight, they didn't even show up to the fight.
Yeah.
You were the senator.
Yeah.
I think in this case, it was surprising to some Republicans who are used to these little self-important people talking and making themselves feel good, but they don't really have any authority. In this process, they might have had authority. Was it hard to go down there and support the actual voters' intention, and did that message carry, or how'd you do it?
I think the message carried. I mean, ultimately, all of us got to the process that are on our slate. Going to the national convention, got to the process differently. I endorsed Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz asked for my endorsement. I gave it. I was there. But data points started to change, and you have to, in politics, respect the people. And it's time, and I agree wholeheartedly with the representative, it's time we put people first. And not just as a slogan, but in our actions and what we want to accomplish in this country. Trade deals, immigration, all of those things, a foreign policy that actually puts Americans first.
Are you trying to say make America great again?
Make America great again.
Joe Lakin, it was interesting, though, that this is even a discussion. In southeast Missouri, it overwhelmingly was for Trump. The only county that wasn't was the France of southeast Missouri. I think they were having a hard time surrendering to making America great again. That's generally their fallback. Why is it even a discussion that the person that wins should win?
Yeah, look, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think we have these political institutions that have been in place for a long time. But and I think in the 8th District, you're fortunate. You got a guy like Eddie Justice who's running the process
Eddie Justice,
smoothly.
absolutely.
And you've got, a number of really good people around the state, but I know some of these conventions ended in an hour, some took 5 hours, and I think, we do need to make that process, probably update it, look at it, make sure it still makes sense, that we're not going back to convention fights of the 1960s and 70s, and I think we ought to, take a look at those things.
Jeff Mazur, one of the most articulate minds on the Democrat side. How do you defend superdelegates? I mean, seriously, this is America.
I tend to agree with the position that we should let the will of the voters carry the day. People vote for someone, that person should win. People vote for a president, he should get to select members of the Supreme Court in the United States of America. These seem like very, very democratic principles and things that we can get behind, whether it's in the delegate selection process or any other process we have.
So I have these 2 quick predictions. Do they change the delegate process, and does Trump become a drag on the Republicans in Missouri? Representative.
Well, I think you can't answer that question right now. I think what you're going to see is when we get further into the process and you have two candidates, if it's Hillary Clinton and if it's Donald Trump, then the true questions have to be answered. It's not, I've got this deal and I'm going to do this deal with China. How are you going to do these things? That's what the people want to know.
Jeff Manzer, do they change the system, and does Trump drag Republicans in Missouri?
I think yes, Trump drags Republicans in Missouri broadly. I think the system, it's goofy, and I've seen it firsthand before. Ultimately, it looks like it's going to pan out in the way where voters ultimately made the right choice. So I think typically things don't get changed when the outcome was still the right outcome.
Right before we head to break, Jason Crowder, they change the system.
I don't think they changed the system. They don't want to let go of the power.
Does Trump drag Missourians down in Missouri?
Absolutely not. I think the grassroots, the real issue that no one's talking about is 70% of Republicans in exit polls feel betrayed by Republican leadership. So if it's Ann Wagner or Roy Blunt, they better start paying attention
Maybe Donald
to
Trump should be
those
so
numbers.
lucky to have Paul Ryan
Exactly.
up with him.
Exactly.
Joe Lakin, quick, do they change the system?
Yeah, look, I think every cycle they look at revamping this stuff. I think
Number
they probably
two,
do.
is it more dynamic? You know these House races as well as anybody. Does it help Andrew McDaniel in the Boot Hill? Does it help Shane Road in Jeff County? But does it maybe drag down some of St. Louis County and Clay County? Or is it just over the top? He helps them or hurts them?
Yeah, look, I think you look at the areas of the state where the Republican supermajorities have been built. They've been built in Jefferson County, Clay County, even South County. We talked about. The first Senate district is a much older demographic district, and I think that's a crowd that's been supportive of Trump. So no, I think we still have a great slate going forward.
And we'll be right back to dig into some of the Missouri legislative last week in the General Assembly. After the break, we'll leave you with this week's leading Missouri economic indicators.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
Welcome back this week in Missouri politics. We've talked the presidential race. Now we're going to talk about the last week of the Missouri legislative session. And Representative Bob Burns, I think the last week of session may be defined by this week. Paycheck protection overridden in the House. You had some folks flip both ways. Were you disappointed in some of the folks that flipped?
I was. Because what we've talked about in this business, political business, once you give your word, that's your word. You better pretty well know what you're talking about when you do that, because when you flip, then they look back at everything you've done and said, well, you're telling the truth then as well. I had a coach that I met when I was 8 years old, and he told me something. He said, Burns, I can't hear your words because your actions speak so loudly. This business and working for people is all about your actions. And I seriously feel that the people of the state of Missouri on both sides are wanting some action. How do we do things better? And paycheck protection or deception, whatever you want to say, has nothing to do with helping our economy, helping our schools, helping our roads and bridges, which are vitally important to economic development and producing the future of our world and our schools.
Jeff Mazur, is there any coincidence that you're no longer actively involved in the labor movement and this passes this year? I mean, that's what the word in the that's what the road in the rotunda was.
It's nice to hear, Scott. I think looking at the issue broadly, there is, on the American scene, there's no bigger issue, I think, than income inequality. There are institutions and actors who have in their interests exacerbating that gap, making it worse. And that's why you see bills like this, which actively try and push down the one institution that's out there that's really trying to help close that gap and help people at the working end of the spectrum, at the low end of the income scale, push up and close that inequality gap. And I think we see those forces of inequality winning this battle in paycheck protection right now, and I think it's a bad thing for the state.
Jason Crowder, something you worked on even back when you were in the legislature. Interesting dynamic in this. When John Kerry votes for things before he votes against me, he's a flip-flopper. But in certain circles in Joplin, if you vote for things before you vote against him, I guess you're for freedom.
Yeah. You know, I mean, everyone's made valid points from their perspective. When I was in the General Assembly, gosh, to say one of those statements, but way back when in 2012, I mean, this issue came up, and basically the way we wrote the law, I'll let you in on a little secret now that I don't have the obligation to vote on bills. I don't read them anymore. So I don't know exactly how this bill was
about
written.
6 million Missourians have something
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know particularly the language in this, but basically what we came to a conclusion is that the state is no longer going to be the banker for any organizations, charities, unions, any other type of payroll deductions. The taxpayers just don't need to be in the business of redirecting paycheck money to any organization, union or otherwise. That's how John Lamping and I wrote it. We got it out of the Senate without a filibuster. It went over the House and Shane Schuler killed it. So, you know, I mean, I don't know what's going on now, but
Joel,
it is
maybe
what
what's
it is.
going on here is big week for the speaker. Nobody thought he could pass it with an override majority the first time. Hardly anybody, especially I think the state Senate thought he could actually move and override the governor, but he did. Big week for him.
Yeah, I think it absolutely was a big week for him. And I think, you know, people talking about folks flip-flopping, well, it happened both ways. So that goes both ways. It passed the legislature originally with a veto-proof majority in the House, and it passed again with a veto-proof majority. To Jeff's point, you know, income inequality is a problem, and I think the Speaker has made that a priority. He talks about those things. A lot of Republicans don't.
What about a tax cut that would help literally everyone?
Well, look, I think, you know, there was a lot of work that went into a tax cut a couple years ago. You don't exactly have a cooperative governor in Jay Nixon. You know, had to
stop the Speaker this week.
No, it sure didn't. I mean, a huge week for him. You know, voter ID, paycheck protection, a number of issues. He's had a great session. And three ethics bills already.
I think he's the one that carried this across. I mean, we saw Representative Hicks walk into the chamber, shoulders slumped to push that green button. Representative Burns, I think we talked off air, just goes, labor really can't trust skinny people, right? I mean, that's the lesson of the week.
Well, I weighed about 180 pounds, had a 31-inch waist when I came to Jeff City, and look at me now.
Jeff Mazur, voter ID was moved to the ballot this week. What's the argument for, I mean, you have an ID, right? What's the argument for not having an ID to vote?
Yeah, the argument is that this is just naked politics. This isn't about protecting elections or anything else. This is about helping one party do better in elections and win more elections when they're already in power. There's no conservative case for conservative governance around photo ID. It doesn't save any money. It costs the state more money. It doesn't make government smaller. It makes government bigger. It doesn't create any new freedoms. It actively takes the freedom to vote away from a substantial number of people. So I think you look at it, you see it's a nakedly political ploy to help one party win elections, and I think that's the argument against it.
Bob, you stop somebody in a diner, they're probably going to think they have to have their driver's license to vote, right?
Well, here's the issue. When the Iron Belt started, a lot of folks moved up from Mississippi, Alabama. That's how Chicago became blues capital of the world. Take the 81-year-old African-American woman who has no birth certificate. She was born in a sharecropper's cabin, if she was lucky, has no evidence of her birth. So to get a voter ID, she has to go back to Alabama with a judge, with a lawyer, go before this judge and prove she was born. That costs tens of thousands of dollars. So what happens? The one inalienable right she has is to vote. That's now been taken from her. I think the last case of voter fraud in this state was in 1936. Where's the voter fraud? Again, no offense to anyone here. All this does is help Republicans get elected because it disenfranchises about 200 to 250,000 African-American voters who vote Democratic.
Do you believe there'll be 250,000 fewer voters in 2016 or 2018 when this goes into law?
No. I mean, with all due respect, I mean, you can't do anything in this country without an ID. Anything. Yeah, the legislature is now dealing with the fact of what are they going to do when the federal government no longer recognizes Missouri driver's licenses, and everyone's freaked out. If ID wasn't a big deal, why are we freaked out that the federal government's no longer going to recognize Missouri's driver's licenses? This is just a natural course of everything else as we get into more and more items of identification fraud. It's a natural course of everything. I think it's smart government. And
Joe Lakeland, does this pass?
Oh, absolutely.
I think it does too.
Absolutely.
You believe it when it gets to the ballot, does it pass?
Well, I believe it's been watered down quite a bit. I don't have any objection to what the two gentlemen just said. However, we're talking about two different issues. You talk about the lady or the gentleman who probably doesn't drive, who doesn't have the credit card, who doesn't have the conceal and carry permit. So how do they get that ID? Now, if the state said, we'll pick up the cost to get them that ID, it flies through. There's no objection. But just as sure, everybody has an ID, but a lot of folks don't have that ID. And quite frankly, on the Missouri driver's license, Missouri did years ago what the federal government suggested they do. Their driver's licenses would now be recognized.
Jeff Mazur, quick predictions. If it goes to the ballot, does it pass?
A lot of things pass that don't always hold up to legal scrutiny.
Is that right? Interesting take on them. And that's what this has ran into in the past, correct?
Sure.
Let's talk about somebody that did have a big week, is Eric Schmidt. Senator Brown dropped out of the treasurer's race. He now has no primary, and his opponents aren't exactly setting the world on fire fundraising. Joe Lakeland, explain what this does for the overall Republican ticket, and I guess big week for John Hancock.
Yeah, look, we're in an era of Republican primaries in Missouri, I think, as we've moved past being a very purple state and moved to more of a red state. You have a lot more people looking to run statewide because the opportunity in November is there to be successful. And, we saw this week Senator Brown make a selfless decision. I think the world of him. He's a fantastic guy, came in, won a tough seat, pickup for Republicans in 2010. But Eric Schmidt is a fantastic leader for Missouri, and I think having him clear in a primary, focused on November, and also focused on building our party, helping our candidates up and down the ballot, I think that was a big week for the party.
Jeff Mazur, does it worry you that maybe they're getting their act together? Maybe John Hancock's righting this ship, and they're turning a supermajority legislative seats into some statewide wins?
I think that the treasurer's race basically looks the same as it's always looked. Eric Schmidt has always been the center of gravity in this race. He's raised lots of money, positioned himself in a place where it always looked like he was in the catbird seat to win this thing. So I don't think a lot changes. I mean, practically there are some differences with not having Senator Brown in the race versus having him in the race, but I don't think it changes the dynamic much. I think that race still looks, over the long term, the same way it looked a year ago.
Bob Burns, you've worked with Senator Schmidt. Big week for him, clearing the primary, right?
Yes, I worked with Senator Schmidt on his Senate Bill 5. I have a bill in about helping municipalities in St. Louis County disincorporate, which there are 90, far too many, probably what's caused the problem out at the St. Louis County Board of Elections. Eric Schmidt, is a likable person. I didn't know Senator Crowell till today, very likable man. So the issue is now if somebody
Don't tell anybody.
Yeah, now if somebody would have said that to me 10 years ago, Bob Burns will be working with these Republicans, I would say, oh, you're crazy. But you work for the greater good. And Senator Schmidt, and I'm not endorsing him on his race, but Senator Schmidt is an easy person to work with. I think he has the greater good in his mind, and he and I have worked together on several issues.
Well, Senator Crowell, I'll recognize you to close. You're welcome to say no.
No, thanks. Yeah, no, I think it's always a huge when you don't have a primary.
Saves him $1 million at least.
It saves him tons of money. There's only 2 ways to run in politics: unopposed or scared. So he gets to run unopposed, and he can run scared in the general election, and I would advise him to do so.
You were one of the pioneers of the Republican majority in the legislature while they were losing statewide races. Is this a sign that under John Hancock's leadership and some other folks in the party, they are starting to move toward figuring out this statewide Rubik's Cube that they just haven't been able to figure out previously?
I mean, and I think it's to the credit of the candidates themselves. I'm not going to give the credit to John. I think he's a good executive director, but I know that Eric Schmidt has reached out and continued to reach out to Doc Brown. They were able to bridge that divide. I think a lot of that primary was driven by a roofing company executive than it really was Doc Brown or Eric Schmidt. And I think at the end of the day, when 2 individuals, as the representative said, can start working together and not listening to roofing executives in Southwest Missouri, that good decisions can be made. So congratulations to Eric and Doc Brown.
Let's talk about, because still in 2016, talk about the governor's race a little bit. Jeff Mazur, do you see a favor yet in the Republican Party, or has it just been Peter Kinder until the ads start?
Well, I think Peter's been, in a really good position in this. I think that maybe starts to change now with the Trump kind of taking over the Republican nomination. I think that sucked up a lot of the oxygen in the minds of voters and who haven't really been able to focus on something like the gubernatorial primary now. And that benefited Peter because he started with the name ID, even though he doesn't really have the money. Now, as people can sort of shift their attention away from the presidential race into something like the gubernatorial primary, you're going to see these guys who stacked up big piles of money, I think, a little more able to break through and change the dynamics of that race a little bit. So I think Trump wrapping this thing up before the convention really hurt Peter.
Would have been great for Peter Kinder,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
Representative Burns, of the 4 Republicans, which one of you think has the advantage in South County?
I think Peter Kinder is out and about, and I think he is, again, he's a likable person when you speak with him. I think the person who brings out the fact to bring voters together for the good of the state. In other words, as my wife always tells me, get over yourself and talk about what's good for Missouri and how you're going to accomplish that.
Men on the left, I know the 2 gentlemen on my left are supporting Eric Greitens, but when you look at the other side, Chris Koster was down in the Boot Hill this week. Does it worry you that Chris Koster is not on I-70? He's out in places where they generally vote Republican, and I think maybe he's got a good chance to get a few of them, right, Senator?
I worked with Chris when he was a Republican in the Senate, and I worked with Chris when he was a Democrat Attorney General. I like Chris. I think on the Republican side, though, right now, if he had to handicap anything, it would be Peter Kinder's race to lose. We'll just have to see.
Joel, get 10 seconds left. Whoever's the nominee, how they beat Chris Koster?
Well, you got to get the right nominee, and I think that nominee is Eric Greitens.
That where it starts with? I'm going to give a shout out real quickly to all the mothers on this Mother's Day edition, especially one special mother, Terry Fawn in West Butler County. From everyone here to you, happy Mother's Day, and we'll see you next week on This Week in Missouri Politics.
Happy Mother's Day,
This Week in Missouri Politics, brought to you in part by Sterling Bank.